Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition. And just a note, due to the holidays, we'll be releasing one episode this week and one episode the following week. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel of Austere Manufacturing.
And you have a very good quote for us.
If you board the wrong train, it's no use running along the corridor in the opposite direction. From Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Mm-hmm. Wise words.
That is a funny one.
I've been thinking, or this is sort of like playing in my head a little bit in terms of that like funny quote from a friend a while back. The work you take is the work you get.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's very true and important to take into consideration. And our work mix has been changing a lot recently.
Uh-huh.
And it's definitely forcing some thinking on my end of like, well, if we continue to do this, like I either need to get off this train or like figure out how I'm going to drive this train.
Interesting.
Because right now the train is just like kind of going and I'm like, ah.
Right.
And I'm not to the point of running in the opposite direction down the corridor. But it's like, yeah, it's pulling away from the station. I got to figure out if this is the right one or if it's time to get off. And if it is the right one, how to get the right people kind of on the train with me to make it work. It's a tricky moment.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think also it makes me think of like the usefulness of A3, of kind of understanding like the bigger picture when making a decision. Not that you necessarily made a decision. I think it sounds like customers sort of made the decision for you in a funny way, a little bit.
A little bit. I mean, we chose to quote it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it also plays into the ongoing question we've had about where do you put your improvement efforts.
Yeah.
And I do feel sometimes that like some of those improvement projects are like a train, and once it takes off, like all of a sudden you have people invested, you have a lot of energy moving in that direction, and if it's not what you need at that moment, it's like you're kind of a little bit screwed. I mean, you can always pull the plug, but it's often pretty disruptive to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, it does seem like it's very easy to not realize the magnitude of small decisions in a funny way. Where it's like, oh, let's improve this. I mean, I'm thinking like right now we're implementing a robot.
Yeah.
And I don't think we went into it, and we'll see if this is a mistake. I don't know if we went into it being like, let's discover whether robotics is a thing for us right now. Or I don't know if robotics is the right word. We're running a CNC, so it is.
Right.
But like a 6-axis robotic arm.
Yeah.
Is that the thing for us right now? Or instead we went into it, I think now that I'm saying this, in classic form, rather than just saying like, hey, let's learn about this. I kind of went into it like, let's switch to robotic painting. And I've seen videos of other people doing it. Obviously, like automotive is all robotic, but I think it's going to be quite difficult. And like you're saying, sunk cost fallacy is real, but I think so is like not vetting ideas ahead of time enough, or like really thinking hard on them.
Yeah. Like,
what will this mean for this aspect, and what will it mean for this other thing, and how does cash flow look?
Yeah.
Anyway, so don't run in the opposite direction on the train. Look at the map for a bit.
Yeah.
Or something. That said, the flip side, of course, is that I think it's sort of, you have to change the concept in your head into like, let's learn about this train, maybe by riding it a couple stops. Because otherwise it can be very it can be very paralyzing.
Yeah, just stare at the map for
your
entire life.
Just stare at the map and be like, this is really complicated, and I don't know where this train goes in 30 years.
Right.
And so, I've kind of been contemplating at what excuse me, at what point as a small business or as a beginning business do you actually have, I don't want to say product market fit, this is sort of pulling from the startup paradigm, but like at what point are you kind of like, okay, yes, this is a good business, let's scale this, instead of saying, okay, we're on to something for sure, like people like what we're doing, people are paying us money, definitely ways of improving, let's keep not jumping around, but let's keep experimenting across different, adjacent areas, and not just say like, okay, this is it. Like this, let's refine this to the nth degree. Yeah. I don't really know how to balance those two things though. Like keep moving, but also plan and think, but also like learn. Yeah. It's, I don't have an answer to that. Like, what would you have done differently, right? Like, it's probably good to see the failure modes of your existing business to understand, like, the bounds of how that should operate well. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's good to keep the learning perspective mentality in mind. I think my current situation is compounded by, I think, some bad timing choices. Or not all of it was choices, some bad timing, like coincidence, right? With, the disruption from moving, the time investment of onboarding somebody. So we kind of like sunk a lot of time and money into moving and training and trying to kind of spin up a bunch of new improvements and putting a bunch of time into that, while spending a lot of money. And so we've ended up in a cash flow crunch while also trying to like alter how we run the business, which has been, and I'm kind of overstating this, alter how we run the business. Like fundamentally things are pretty similar from the day to day, but I think we were trying to like kind of push in a new direction. And then I've had just this week was like, okay, pull it back. That's actually not going to be a good fit for what we're trying to do at this moment. I don't know if that answered the question effectively, but yeah, you do have to like, you find those boundaries and figure out what doesn't work. So but I think it's hard to be aware of, I mean, we've talked about like the hill climbing heuristic and the challenges with it. Where you can end up peak seeking and finding a local optimum, and you don't know that if you go like down a little valley, and then you can go way up the other side into something that's a lot more profitable, a lot easier, a lot, something. And it's, you can't see that is there, and so you do sort of need to keep groping around in a dark room, So you find a thing, and you do have to make time for that, but also how do you refine what you're doing and not say like, we're polishing a turd to some degree. Not that either of our businesses I think are turds, like they're okay, they're good, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't something that's adjacent that's way better, right? And I think I've been thinking about that a lot in light of launching a new product that is less, I mean, our cam buckles aren't commodity, but they're adjacent. Like other cam buckles are a commodity product. And so we are sort of fighting that mentality to some degree. Right. You're making a like super high end commodity product, basically. Yeah. I don't know. I think the same struggle, I would like to draw the analogy to coffee in this country, right? Like not that many years ago, it was like, I'm not spending $6 for a cup of coffee. I can get it for 50 cents at Dunkin' Donuts. And it tastes like that. And do tell. So I mean, that's the analogy I'd like to make, but it's still something you have to educate and something you have to find an entry point into that market. Sure. And maybe, I mean, we also talked about maybe another good example is like Sir Kensington's. They launched in ketchup and discovered that it was not a great entry point into making high-end condiments, even though the premise of high-end condiments was a hole in the market. But it's so hard as a small business to make time for that experimentation.
The experimentation, yeah.
It's not like we have a team that's sort of like, hey, why don't we go explore other adjacent,
right,
opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're coming up against is like, I think there's a high probability that kind of this new work mix that we find ourselves in right now, at least, has a lot more potential than what we've been doing in the past. But on the small business struggle side, right, it requires everyone in the business to really step up their game, or at least like stretch into new capabilities and new like levels of working.
And just for the listener, what you're talking about is essentially how many parts you program versus how many parts the customer then wants from that program.
Well, that's part of it. So yeah, like I would say a year ago, our bread and butter was like quantity 20 to quantity 500.
Okay.
Of like low tolerance, kind of high aesthetic value, low tolerance parts.
Okay.
And due to that, like we kind of tailored our work system to that kind of job, and that has a certain rhythm to it. There's certain things that you have to pay a lot of attention to, and the mix from person to person, like programming load is medium. It's easy to, there's like things tend to run for a decent amount of time, so you can kind of like, the pace is pretty reliable. Whereas now all of a sudden we are going to typical quantity of like 1 to 6, lot more part numbers, and the other like sort of the other part that makes it more challenging is they're generally harder materials to cut and the tolerances are tighter. So the programming has to be more on point, right? It's just less forgiving of mistakes. And then whoever's running the machine or doing the inspection has to be more on their game in terms of like actually checking parts and making sure they're good, especially when there's only one, right? Like it has to be
right.
It has to be right.
Especially when your stock gets expensive.
Yeah, especially when the stock is expensive. So it's like just changing the requirements of what everybody in the shop does quite a bit, and changing the work balance quite a bit.
Between operators and programmers, or prove out? I guess also prove out.
Also prove out.
But
also
I guess if
inspection.
you're doing one, prove out sort of is
what's
the
that
part? If you're doing one piece, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, we usually do a setup piece.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's almost always
sense.
2.
You look at some of those parts where it's like, yeah, this forging took 2 years to procure, and we have one of them.
Yeah.
Go.
I mean, you see why they're so expensive, because there is so much double checking.
Yeah, and I would imagine your programming is a little different because you'd leave a lot more to the operator, right? You'd like...
Probably, yeah.
But then things like stainless are challenging because you can't just keep taking little whisper cuts, right? You sort of. I mean, it kind of depends. Like, carbide's pretty impressive. It's true.
You can mess it up, obviously, but...
I learned some hard lessons about work hardening in college, machining some drive shafts. And it's like once your drill bit starts, we weren't CNCing.
Yeah.
And once the drill bit started kind of like, if you have like a good chip going and you just like blast through it, it's no problem. And you're like, oh, great, easy. I do this all day. And then you like flinch and anyway.
I mean, especially I think manual machining with no coolant and high-speed steel and
all that
with carbide and CNC and a reasonable feed, I feel like you can still take pretty light cuts to like bring something into size if we're talking about milling or turning.
Yeah.
As long as you're not just there's limits, but in any case, that's sort of like the underlying thing. Is, if I'm trying to think of a good analogy, it'd be like if you were in a restaurant and like it was like a short order, like breakfast joint.
Right.
And all of a sudden your customer's like, well, actually we're planning to come for dinner. It's going to be in the morning, but we're coming for dinner and we expect appetizers and filet mignon and whatever. And you're like, okay, I guess we're going to figure out how to do this on the fly. It's not quite that extreme, but it's sort of, that.
I mean, it sort of is. It's like
Yeah.
we're still going to use a stove, and we're going to use the oven, and
Right.
we're going to use knives. But yeah, I could see that. The timing's different. The
Yeah.
just workload.
Yeah.
Of course, now I know nothing about restaurants, so maybe I'm wrong. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely
So
throw me for a loop.
in on the topic of doing things live and on the fly,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of reflecting a bit on where we are post like holiday rush and dropping a new product. Things got pretty intense in the shop, and we made it through without majorly disappointing our customers in terms of, timing.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Going from like the first few days of production, I was like, all right, let's do 30 pieces today. Like if we do 30 every day, we're in good shape. Meanwhile, we had been shipping like 50 to 60 of the other buckles. So I was like, 30 seems very achievable. End of day one, we had like 3 shippable, 3 were actually like in the mail.
That hurts.
It's like, huh. Then the next day I was like, 9 are in the mail.
Yeah.
You're like, okay. And it is sort of chasing down, like, where did everything go wrong?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like we had piles of scrap at 9. It was more like, oh, well, we messed up the timing on that, and then we couldn't get enough in the oven. And so tomorrow we'll have a bunch to ship, but today we only have 9. And then the next day it was like, oh, well, now we ran out of this other thing, so we can only ship like 15.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a lot of days of that. And then we really... Like we had another person in the shop, and I think we hit like 45. And then I think we hit like 50 or 60. I could go back and look, but then we started hitting those numbers without an extra person, which was kind of cool.
That's awesome.
But
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Were you still shipping the same number of cam straps pretty much this whole time?
I have no idea.
Oh, do you have a sense? Did they kind of fall off a little bit, or
We didn't have any bulk orders running at that time. So yeah, probably not. We were probably shipping like 30-ish or 20 to 30 a day. Instead of like 50 or 60.
Yeah. That's pretty impressive though that you.
Yeah, I mean that all that stuff is pretty dialed, like systems wise. The fact that I don't know, I feel like speaks to the fact that it just happens.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm saying, what's impressive is that like a rolling start on a new product didn't also like mess up everything else in the shop.
Yeah, it did a little bit, but pretty minor things. The main one being paint. I think I mentioned that like configuring the oven for the belt buckles meant we couldn't paint the other buckles, and then I made new trays so we could do both.
Yeah.
Those trays are really tight in the oven, which is annoying. So when you're sliding them in, you're like, am I going to scrap these parts? Not all of them. It would be the ones on the ends, like rubbing on the inside of the oven. Can
you paint both types of buckles at the same time, or do you have to batch?
They're batched to some degree, but not like today we're going to paint this type of buckle. Tomorrow we'll paint a different one. It's more like,
but you can't.
This tray will be cam buckles and ladder locks, and then this tray will be belt buckles,
but in the same oven. That's
and they
cool.
all sort of go through at the same pace. So like we can flow all of that through the oven.
That's awesome.
But the whole time we sort of survived by like expediting, I would say. We never established Kanban for the belts. I mean, I shouldn't say that. The cards are around. But like it was one of those things where we were trying to Kanban an amount that never existed in a funny way. So we never had a buffer because we'd ship everything we could conceivably get.
That's the dream, right? It's just pull.
It is the dream for sure. No, I think like on this podcast we talked about a lot of like, oh, this is pull. This is awesome. And so we definitely saw that, which was really cool. Partly because Kanban fell apart or never got established, I think is more accurate. And so now I'm kind of wondering like,
right, like to implement Kanban the way you have for the rest of your system, you would have had to like, instead of have a rolling start, you would have had to like prep for a couple weeks and like fill all your buffers.
I think
before
so.
releasing, kind of, instead of being like, okay, we're going to start making stuff and selling it today. And I know that you had made prototypes, but you hadn't filled your buffers, right?
Had not filled the buffers, had prototypes, did a lot of testing, but like I kind of pulled the trigger being like, I don't know, I didn't want to.
Right. It's that
over like
it could have flopped completely.
Exactly. It could have been like, we sold, I don't know, 50. Great.
Yeah.
We can make 50. Anyway, but it's interesting. So now the shop is kind of in shambles is probably an overstatement, but like we were so busy, there wasn't time to do anything, which I think is definitely wrong. I mean, like there probably was. I don't want busyness to be an excuse for falling off of improvements, and we did make a lot of improvements, and I felt like those improvements were more targeted at actual limitations to production. But I think there was another layer that was like, there are stacks of like cardboard boxes from like things that have come in that need to get implemented, or like packaging. Like we had a big increase in volume of packaging, and we do have a shelf for that to go on. But then when I went to put them on the shelf, like there wasn't a Kanban made, and I didn't have time to make that Kanban.
Right.
And now it's still sitting in the shop, just in a pile.
Yeah.
And so like the shop is a little bit of a mess visually for sure, but also a mess in terms of like, it definitely stress tested our systems, and some systems totally broke down.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out like what that means, or should we have done anything differently, or should we, or yes, the answer is yes, for sure. What should we have done differently?
Right. Also the question is like, could you have done anything differently without a major change to like,
we're in a good place. Like we just sold a bunch of product and shipped it successfully, and I mean, that's a win.
Yeah. No, I think it's a kind of going back. It's like, what's to learn from that? Not like, what did we do wrong, but like, what can we do better in the future?
For sure.
Have another person. Or I don't know, it seems like adding some sort of a routine where creating Kanban, if there needs to be, as part of a daily task list or something. And
I think so. One of the big projects we've walked away with is setting up an ordering and receiving area with a dedicated computer set up with everything you need to like make Kanban in our new system. Because right now it's sort of like, we typically use the computer at the assembly station to make them, because the printer's plugged in there for absolutely no reason. So kind of lowering the friction to doing some of that stuff. But I mean, similar to you, I guess, like they're all good problems in a funny way. And I shouldn't say that. The cause of all these problems is, I think, a good direction for the business. So it's not like we made a mistake in that way, or that I didn't want to seize this opportunity, or any of that. But it is still like kind of stressful. Or scratch that. Very stressful. And just like incredibly time consuming, and if the systems could have persisted through that, I think it would have, and I think generally should have taken less of a human toll to kind of get us through. It's a hard it's like you can't know it until you've gone through it. And like, I don't know. It's hard to predict until you've been there. It's hard to predict, and like next product launch, just because this one was a success doesn't mean the next one will be. So like next time I'll go like, you know what? No, we're not hitting go on this until like we have our buffers, we have Kanban set up everywhere. And then it's like crickets, and you'd be like, oh, well, this isn't better. In fact, this is worse. And all these companies, I don't know. So like, you could set just
sorry, I'm jumping to problem
No.
solving, but like next product launch, you could set like inventory limits per day, like how many you could sell per day for the first week.
Yeah.
To like allow yourself to actually ramp instead of being like, oh no, we have whatever 500 orders
Right.
in the first few days. You know, it could be,
Yeah.
there's a lot of potential advantages to that.
For sure. I think the trouble is, and I'd be curious what other people have found. I think something that we had a lot of news coverage, and typically articles, like publications, want to cover newsworthy events.
Yeah.
Product launches being a great one, right?
Uh-huh.
It's like, we're an industry magazine. Here's something that happened in the industry that's new. You'll want to hear about it. And us covering it, or more, us not covering it, sort of reflects poorly on us being in the know on our industry, I think is kind of part of it, right? Like, where you go for your news on a particular industry is a battle people are fighting to win.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to leverage those opportunities. And if you go to a website, I don't really know how this plays out, because like there's this whole like manufactured scarcity thing,
Right. That's kind of what I was
which
thinking.
is like, oh my God, it's sold out.
Yeah.
Damn. But then, that's nice to say, but if 100 people end up on your site being like, damn, I'll come back, and never do come back,
Yeah.
are you ahead or behind? I don't really know.
The question, yeah, it's a hard question. I mean, I guess you have to test it and answer, but it could be a thing where it's like you make it explicit, like we're releasing whatever,
Oh, that's a thought.
30 today, 50 tomorrow,
Right.
75 next week, different colors. Like, I don't know. You could make
Right.
it into a thing where it's like
A bit of a game.
people got excited about it. It would drive people to your social media to like get updates on how many are being released that day. And I don't know.
Right.
That's a whole project, but it'd be a way that you could kind of take back control, I think, a little bit of that,
That's a good point.
while also driving up interest. Possibly.
Possibly.
One hopes.
For sure. Yeah. Anyway, so kind of gathering ourselves, figuring out what's next.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a few directions the company can go in now.
Yeah.
Not exactly directions. It's just kind of like, okay, what pieces are we going to put in place when?
Yeah.
Moving, hiring, getting a new mill.
Yeah.
In what order? Pursuing which contracts? Like, do you get the contracts and then go like, okay, we have all these contracts, let's move, or do you just build it and then find the work? Probably some balance of the two.
It seems to be a balance of the two. I think like the conservative methodology, right, is to like do as much as you can with what you have.
Right.
Until you really, really have the whatever you've sort of made your profit, and then you can grow into that. But also that comes with a lot of stress and challenge. So
yeah. And like for us, that would mean
I've usually gone the other way, which I'm not necessarily sure I can recommend, but
it's worked so far.
Yeah, build it and they will come kind of method.
Right.
Which the more I get into this, I'm kind of like, I don't think that's quite smart. But
I mean, there's probably a mix, right? And at the end of the day, it is a mix, because even when you move, it's sort of like, okay, if we're in whatever 500 square feet now,
yeah,
and we need 1,000, you don't really want to rent 1,000 square feet if you immediately need 1,000. You probably want to rent
right
1,500 or 2,000 or 3,000, or ideally 1,000 with room to expand,
right,
and scale your rent accordingly, which I think is a bit of a unicorn.
I'm definitely dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
Paying a lot for empty floor space.
Yeah, and like that might be awesome in 3 years. You're like, wow, we don't need to move again. We can just like keep going. So
yeah, I am. Yeah, right now, this has also been part of the struggle, is like we put all this energy and money into moving. It's certainly opened doors in terms of like systems that we can implement. But actually finding the time and money to implement those systems is hard.
Right.
And like
interesting.
On the day to day, like we're not more productive right now than we were in our old shop.
Yeah.
So that's been a real, I don't like, a kick in the gut is a little bit of a strong word, but it's a little bit like, okay, we're just spending a lot more money now.
And doing the same thing.
And doing the same thing more or less that we were before.
Yeah.
Like there are some advantages and there will be ongoing advantages, but it's a little hard in the moment to be like, oh man, this is.
It's funny. I feel like we sort of talked about this a bit, but not, it was sort of like the immediate. Mm-hmm. Like we had talked about like, okay, how do you cash flow a move?
Yeah.
And realizing that like renting a space does not mean that you should race at moving everything into that space.
Yeah.
In a weird twist.
Yeah.
But I guess even in a longer term basis, it's like, okay, we moved in, but there was a huge interruption.
Yeah.
And now we're just getting back up to where we were in the old space because it was so optimized.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it is tough to kind of, I think the part of it is you have to like have maybe more preparation and foresight into like what that is really going to cost and comprehension that it isn't going to make you more money for quite a long time.
Right.
And that it's an investment for like a year down the road. Unless you are like at that point in your business where you're like, I genuinely need a bigger machine for this work and we're going to move and buy that machine and hit the ground running. But the way we did it was definitely not that. It was kind of like, this is an opportunity that has come along and might not come along again for a while. So we need to jump on it for that reason. But in the moment, we're not more productive.
Yeah.
And so far have been less productive potentially.
I mean, presumably just setting everything up and.
Yeah. And yeah, I think like definitely took some time to be like, we're in this space. Let's make improvements. Let's optimize for it. And maybe pushed a little too far to that direction, honestly, like sacrificing production.
Right.
Feeling it now, I guess, live and learn.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So the one thing I am kind of reflecting on a bit, or I should say another thing, is in designing the future, they were sort of talking about product launches. In most companies, it's like a very small team, and then more and more people join the team up till the deadline of kind of launch.
Uh-huh.
And that at Toyota, it tends to be the other way, where you get everyone involved in early.
Yeah.
And I think a few things, I think that is somewhere maybe we failed on this last one, is like things definitely got busier and busier toward product launch because of a lot of problems that I could have foreseen and should have at least sort of gone through like a checklist of being like, are the tool paths like finalized? Not like we won't change them ever, but just like,
good,
we're happy, they're stable. Maybe our inventory management, just like what are the different aspects? Like, is the design good? Yeah. All this stuff. On the flip side though, like a lot of that does sort of reek of confidence in the market, your analysis, like just the whole thing. And maybe that confidence comes from somewhere else of sort of like, okay, we've really thought deeply about where we are, where we think we should go. Yeah. And that doesn't mean we're right. I guess I don't know how that sort of meshes with the idea of like taking constant feedback from the market.
Yeah. I think this is hard as a starting business and kind of like forging into a new space. Where it's like, yeah, Toyota can do that because they make cars reliably well. Yeah. They have a very good history, like track record, and they have a decent idea of what the market wants. So I think they can go into it early and be like, this is specifically what we're targeting. We're trying to fill this very small niche that we know that people want. Other companies are providing this, and we're going to put a lot of energy up front into making sure we like nail that on the head properly. Yeah. Whereas you are kind of like, I'm throwing a frisbee into a crowd of people. Yeah. And seeing if people pick it up and like continue to throw it around, or they just let it fall on the ground and stomp it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the Pontiac Aztec was kind of a notable failure. It's really ugly.
I have to look it up. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
No offense to anyone who drools over the Pontiac Aztec, but I think like the
first thing that comes up on. Oh yeah, that's an ugly car.
That's what they're famous for.
Yeah. Bummer, guys.
And then there was another car I'm forgetting the name of that was designed by committee. Sort of a famous design story where they decided we're going to make the best, like the car for everyone. Like everyone's going to love this car. So they got everyone in, got feedback, tried to sort of...
It wasn't that weird Jeep car thing, was it? What was that
I think there's a lot of examples of pretty weird design choices. But the point being that like even these big companies can miss the mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just don't know how to kind of evaluate that. And I think like going back to last week, like lean for small businesses, I do fundamentally think we're in a different in a different reality than bigger companies. And the bigger can be, you know, a team of 10, or bigger can be a team of 100 or 1,000. Like, I just think each one of those has certain advantages and disadvantages, but they're not the same. And I think that can sound like an excuse and like, let me let myself off the hook. On the other hand, I think instead of that, it can be like, okay, here are the things to pull from. And I think it is confusing. Like for me, it is unclear what I should do, right? Like I could say, well, I'm a small company, so actually building up inventory in my case, seeing as we're not talking about 50,000 square feet of inventory, we're talking about 5 square feet of inventory, like literally, right? Like don't worry about inventory.
Yeah.
On the other hand, then we start driving down our inventory and we're like, oh wow, this is actually pretty awesome for us. Mm-hmm. So like it is easy to let yourself off the hook accidentally and then discover later that you really shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to do that. On the other hand, like maybe it is okay for a small company that's sort of, I don't know what phase we're at. Like it's not pre-product market fit. Like we have product market fit, but I don't think it's like, my feeling is that we're okay. I guess what I would say is we're not right now. Maybe we are now. We weren't a month ago in a place to go say to someone like, hey, give us, you know, whatever, 500 grand or give us $1 million because we're going to scale this. Because it's kind of like, okay, well, there's still question marks. Like what's right now you sort of have like essentially one product. Like, can you duplicate this success? Can you, right? Like, so it's not like the, I guess, like PE phase, you know, private equity phase company by any means. I think there's a lot more speculation around like, okay, like what's next or how are we?
Yeah.
I don't know. How are we growing this? But yeah, anyway, processes are a mess in the shop. Trying to figure out what to learn from that. What to do differently next time. Sounds like we're sort of in similar places.
I think similar places. Also, I think you have like highlighted a couple of them just in this discussion that like could be take 10 minutes after we finish recording and just like write a couple things down, which would be, you know, what's your to-do list for next product launch? Like
for sure.
How do you handle maintaining Kanban as a standard part of work and instead of as an extra step kind of thing, or I don't know.
Yeah. And how do you, this is a big one for me, a big question mark. How do you like production leveling is so key to a lot of these systems working.
Yeah.
What if you just say like for a second, and maybe people are like sitting there being like, you idiot, like don't do this. But like, what if for a second I say like, okay, production leveling is absolutely not an option. What then? Like, does Kanban just not work? Or do you issue, like right now we've been issuing these like emergency Kanban. It's not emergency, but like for the past year, anytime we get a big order, instead of circulating our Kanbans like weirdly fast, because that doesn't work. If your production quantity is much higher, like 5x, 10x higher, then it doesn't work to just be like, well, we'll just circulate them faster. Because it's like, well, now a Kanban that replenishes in a day only represents half a day of production. Like that just doesn't work. Yeah. So we issue these like other colored ones that go into the system to sort of bump all of production up. Yeah. Which feels like a weird workaround. It does work. It's a decent system so far for us.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways to handle that. Seems like the classic gutter company example is one.
But they did production leveling. They didn't try to smooth the market demand. They just went like, okay, internally we'll just do production leveling.
Oh, sure.
Year round, right?
Yeah, right. You're saying just like throw it out the window. And
what if I just say to you like, okay, now like you made 10 a day for the past year, and now I want you to make 100 a day for 5 days.
Yeah, I think you might have a lot of employee churn. I mean, it seems like production leveling is there largely to make the load on people consistent and reliable and something they can handle.
Yeah.
As well as the equipment, but I think mostly the people.
I think I did a decent job insulating the team from this.
Sure, but that's not scalable.
It's A, not scalable. B, I think I just took the brunt of it.
No, exactly. That's,
so, yeah.
So it's like as soon as that's not you anymore and there's a manager.
But even it took a toll on me also.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So, yeah.
Like, and you're willing to because it's your business.
Right.
But if it's someone else and you're asking them to do that for the same paycheck they get every other month or every other week or whatever you do, that's not going to go very far.
Unless you find a special breed of masochist.
Which exists.
I think that's...
But also not
people
scalable.
Who start businesses.
Yeah, right. Right, yeah. They're going to like do that for you for 6 months and then go start their own thing.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah, I don't know. I do... it seems like... I don't have an answer to that, actually. I was going to hazard a guess, but it does seem like production leveling is important in one way or another.
Right. Maybe that's just one of those things. It's like, no, you have to figure this out.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to an extent you do because...
That or you control the market, like having fixed sales,
Right.
Fixing your
just
inventory on the sales side.
Sales.
Which works for people that have a lot of demand. It seems like, there are companies that do that. They're like, well, this is what we have. Buy it or don't. And people tend to buy it and they produce as much as they can.
Yeah.
But again, that's just another form of production leveling, effectively.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Maybe we should try that.
Yeah.
All right, everything's sold out on our website. Sorry.
Well, that's probably a good point to wrap up. Speaking of lots of things to do, I have to get to the shop soon.
Excellent. Well, thanks all for listening.
Yes, indeed.
We have a Patreon.
Check it out.
If you get value from this podcast, consider contributing. There's a lurker level at $1 a month, which seems very affordable.
That's 2 lattes in a year.
That's true.
Not at Dunkin' Donuts, but
no, but in Seattle for sure.
Yeah, maybe one.
Maybe one. Yeah. Anyway, you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com on the internet.
You can find me at likenprecision.com on the internet and lichen_MFG on Instagram, and the pod at incrementalci on Instagram.
And this week we will not be releasing our practice edition on Friday, but instead kicking it to the following Wednesday, and then we'll be back on our normal schedule
in January,
in the new year.
Talk to you soon.